I'll go through the presentation as quickly, as smoothly as I can, and hopefully we have time for questions at the end. It covers a lot of area because I've included the context and the data process and the analysis and the what ifs and some of the issues that come up with a program like this. I'd say it's one of the ones I can say is a happy ending presentation, which is a little bit more than some of the other research that I've been involved in. But let's see what we got. So some abbreviations for you, and you will be tested on these. Inside Out, the IO, RRU, you know what that is. Bachelor of Arts in Justice Studies, William Head Institution, Correctional Service of Canada, the Criminal Code of Canada, and the Corrections and Conditional Release Act are probably two that are quite germane here. And of course, inside and outside students have their own acronyms of IS and AUS. No pun intended. So this idea came up probably 2 years ago now, when I was invited by a colleague to be involved in the Training for Inside Out Education program teaching. And after that, of course, I was really charged, and that's one of the processes that is supposed to happen. And I decided to put the idea together and propose it to the institution and to William Head itself. And William Head Institution, if you're not familiar with it, is a lower security federal penitentiary at the end of the land over here, the end of Metchosin Road. Inside students are what we'll call incarcerated men, and outside students are our students from our Bachelor of Arts in Justice Studies program. The statement of intent was approved by the executive, and the same happened with William Head Institution, and William Head Institution was quite excited about the idea once I presented it. And we ran this as a pilot project, and what happens in the future, of course, will be touched on in the end. So one of the big caveats to running a program like this, especially in the Canadian context, is that the financial costs have to be covered by the institution that's offering the course. That's something to swallow that institutions have to think about. And of course, there's a lot of administrivia in the background that has to be taken care of, because we don't have the processes involved to actually register somebody who doesn't have an internet access. So those kinds of logistics are pretty, you think about, they're giant walls. And I can thank Peter and Michelle Rodrigue and Lynn Gregg. Those people were very, very helpful. The benefits, of course, is that it engages in a community building exercise. And as education is concerned, it sort of expands our domain in what I will call our educational environment impact in the community. I use the term educational footprint, that we go beyond the virtual and the on-campus to now we go to a custodial setting. So we're enlarging that part. The focus on social change is very important for us in humanitarian studies. Really, I think as a university, we are engaged in what we call applied research, which is why we have a research office and people like Vanessa who can help us. And it has the real good feel-good element to it, because we think we're doing something positive. And of course, we have to be careful about that, because what's the road to destruction is paved with good intentions? Is that the one? Is that the one? Yeah. So why do this? I got asked that question quite a few times. Well, at the policy level, and this is probably where I land a lot of the times when I'm looking at some kind of community engagement, is what's the policy background. And the Criminal Code of Canada has as a mandate, in the purpose of sentencing, that rehabilitation is one of those. There's a bunch of other ones. You can see that section D, so the three above them are considered probably more important. But the Correctional and Conditional Release Act, with that term conditional, has as a focus that offenders generally will be returning to the community, so reintegration should be a safe process, and it should allow for people to be able to function. Now, at the moment, programming, and thanks to the previous government federally, have been cut drastically. Many people don't know that up until the 1990s, around 1993, the federal government provided university education for federal inmates. I happened to go to school with the woman who oversaw the Pacific region programming when it was cut. So we had pretty much a big sobbing event when that happened. So this is for us a chance to sort of fill a gap, because for the most part, a lot of the programming being run inside institutions, whether they're provincial or federal, is done by NGOs, nonprofits, volunteers. And we had a couple of weeks ago a Restorative Justice Coalition symposium in this room with people who are involved in restorative justice. And 40 or 50 people all volunteer their time in various places. And education is key to rehabilitation, because we know that success, being able to be successful in a program or in a course, shows that you're able, shows that you have the ability, cognitively that is, and it shows that you can stick to it, you can keep up with the pace, and that you are able to engage at the community level in a non-criminogenic way. It sounds very blunt, but that's kind of what the thinking is. So the program has a social justice focus, a mix of inmates from the institution with outside students, and we hold the course inside the prison. It's predicated on the idea or the notion that it's going to be collaborative dialogue, and with that collaborative dialogue comes a breaking of barriers between groups, and with that breaking of barriers comes a chance for information exchange, for idea exchange, for challenging ideas, and to be able to grow together. And at the same time, and this is the tricky bit, or at least I think it's the tricky bit, they learn content along the way. It's kind of like tricking them into learning, but we don't use those terms. I just realized this is being recorded, and now I've just undone myself. Okay. Keep that amongst yourselves, and maybe we can erase that part of the. Yeah, there you go. Right. Yeah, we'll work on that. General, yeah. So the non-traditional pedagogy basically is anything but this. I would not be standing in front of a group talking most of the time. At the beginning I will, because I shall tell people what we're doing. I start to list a bit of a day outline, what some of the objectives might be. But generally we sit in a large circle format. We do have group works, and people break off into groups and use tables and that kind of thing, but it's generally a co-facilitated kind of environment. And we have all kinds of neat things we learned about teaching pedagogy, which I'm tempted to share, but also want to keep it close to my chest because they're kind of like secret tools. But one of them is called the fishbowl, and there's variations of it. And the fishbowl is one of the students' favorites. We have 4 people, two by two, facing each other. I give them a scenario, I give them a question, or they drum up the question themselves, and then they just start to discuss it. People standing around them on the outside decide when it's time to tag off. And so this can go on forever. Or if we come to a conclusion pretty quick, it's over in a few minutes. But it's generally a very interesting approach. Students, purposeful selection, we had 13 and 13. We did lose one person for health reasons out of the inside group, and another person who was only partly able to attend, but we finished with 25. We met 3 hours once a week on Friday afternoons, and the process of getting the students involved, myself and the manager of programs, interviewing everybody, including inside students and outside students. And basically it was just to determine a fit. And generally that wasn't a problem. And people who were questionable self-selected out long before we got to that point. Really straightforward. The course, a 4th-year course taught to people who sometimes didn't even have a grade 12 education. Some of those people, though, are writing and editing a journal that comes out of William Head Institution called Outward Bound. And some very good writing involved there. So that I thought would be a problem, but overall didn't turn out to be that big of a problem, because reading and comprehension didn't seem to be a problem for most students. And the thing with William Head Institution, because it's low security, they're not afraid to talk to each other and ask each other for help. especially in that context. I wasn't saying that's not the rule over there, but in that context it was. It worked well. It's a 3-credit course. They take that 3 credits with them into the world when they leave. And as it happens, 2 of those graduates were in the Restorative Justice Symposium 2 weeks ago on some kind of day pass, both of them. The course focuses on 5 legal traditions that we study and have conveniently collapsed into these nice little categories, but common law, civil law, indigenous law, socialist law, and Islam. And those topics alone could bury a person in 4 years of study each. So we've jammed all of them together in 12 weeks, and it's pretty fast-paced and pretty, well, to use a really bad word, fun. That's educational, pedagogical talk. Evaluations were done with basically a take-home exam format, some presentations and group discussion work, and a presentation that blew me out of the water once I saw what they could do with very little time to actually meet, because they could only communicate the couple of hours that they were on the site over at William Head, and they couldn't talk on the phone or anything like that to compare notes. So they had to do everything for about a half-hour period I allotted at the beginning of each course for the last 3 episodes before coming up to the presentation. And one of the groups managed to pull off a sock puppet presentation of civil law traditions. I have never been so impressed at creativity in my life. I thought that was quite something. And they actually got it right too. That was the neat part. So, and we got to use the Salmon House, which was very helpful. A nice open space, neutral space, and for the most part, not really in a lot of use on a Friday afternoon. So it worked good. So what was the research all about? Well, the research idea came out after I did the majority of the teaching, and I managed to get ethics approval fairly quickly to do some qualitative interviews with people to find out whether or not the atmosphere and the people involved actually picked up on the global comparative legal traditions that we're talking about. That's a bit amorphous, but at the same time, it's interesting to determine whether or not they're actually picking up on the content in the way that we're hoping they will, that they will have that critical and comparative kind of thinking involved. Some of the relevant literature, I won't spend too much time on this, but and there isn't really a lot on Inside Out anyway, but the idea that the structure improves learning and understanding of the content, the idea of destigmatization, and that's more towards instructors or people that take the teacher training, that we pick up the gauntlet and run with it, that we are able to be less compartmentalized in our own understanding of how people might learn. Change in perception of corrections. This is mostly for outside students, but inside students as well, because they're affected by the fact they're getting a program that's inside an institution. And the last one's probably the most important for inside students, the idea that self-efficacy can be increased. Because generally, regardless of what somebody has done in their lives, the past stays with them all their lives, and the idea that they can grow out of who they have been labeled and who they have become, sometimes through their own actions, sometimes through circumstance, is a real difficult thing to change. So self-efficacy is something that is very important, and there's some pretty good research showing that it does help. So a qualitative approach. I had 2 focus groups, not as many in the second focus group, although I did have 2 people submit separate writing in the last group because they couldn't attend, but they wanted to have their input. Some classical content analysis, or what we call classical content analysis. And the main framing question there, what differences, if anything, that the model had on their learning experience compared to traditional models of universities. So this is primarily focused at the outside students, but there were some inside students who had university training. In fact, there was one person who's in a PhD program and close to finishing. So it's quite a mixed group. And we had sub-questions, and the 4th question is the one that is most important in terms of global influence here, but asking people what stands out about the model for them. Did the mixing of the learning environment, did mixing students in the learning environment have much of an impact? The strengths and the weaknesses of it. Did it influence your understanding of comparative global and legal traditions and philosophies? And the last one, of course, would you recommend it to other people? So what comes out is engaging people where we are. The idea that the pedagogy, the context, and the curriculum all fit. So these are just selected quotes. And I can read them because I know you can't read, so I'll just do that. That's always difficult with PowerPoint, isn't it? It's like, but the scope of the learning dynamic was pretty important for most people. They were quite impressed. It took about an hour and a half of the first day for the walls to come down. It was very quick. And that was because of the context. The learning circle helps, and the environment that we're actually doing it in is a peaceful environment. So like one person says, they gave me a different perspective, challenged me to think about different ways, and having to participate in group sessions that he found interesting. The outside students at the Inside Out program gave a different perspective, and he was getting that perspective from the people he was with, the inside students, because they see the world and they see the justice system, they see law especially, and the purpose of law quite differently than most of us do. From experience, although intellectually they get it, which is always an interesting rub. Collaboration and interaction, that's by design, not a surprise. It pushed people out of their comfort zone. A lot of people who have been inside an institution aren't exactly comfortable around authority figures and people from the outside that might be coming in to judge them. So again, it's pushing them in a way, they don't have to, but it's in a way that they feel comfortable to cooperate and to collaborate. Being put together as equal as students made them very aware of the sort of how we intersect as people in place and time and with our own history. Sub-question, features of the model stand out. They like the diversity. I mentioned the fishbowl. The idea there's no technology. Everybody had the same paper-based resources. It was really nice not to have people looking at their phones while other people were talking. That was kind of nice. There were some complaints about that, though, from the outside people because they wanted to use other resources. And I says, well, whatever they can use, you can use. You figure that out between you and you do it. They liked the group presentations, and they were fun, and they were very knowledgeable. I mean, the sock puppet one was only one particular model, but there was a couple of really good ones. I mean, accents and acting, and I guess because of William Head on stage, there's a little bit of that influence there, so it was quite entertaining and, again, quite enlightening. And instructor involvement, they liked the fact that I facilitated rather than talked. And to be honest, I learned probably as much as they did. Maybe not about some of the content, but certainly about interaction between people and learning dynamics. The influence on the learning format. The Circle model was probably the primary thing. Being able to see each other, being able to ask people to clarify if they needed clarification without looking through somebody's head in front of them. You know, that kind of thing is important. We had small group and large group discussions. We did a lot of flip chart work, posting things on the wall or the floor. The floor works good too. To stand and look at it, it's a different perspective. You know, little things like that mattered. The idea that they could get through the presentation with such a small amount of time or short amount of time to collaborate was something that was pretty impressive to some people. And the team effort was very important as well. I think the sense of mutual trust and respect that formed very early and stayed throughout the whole course was probably the best thing that could have come out of it. Uh-oh. Right. Strengths and weaknesses. Strength was mixing, and the idea that it levels the playing field because they're all using the same resources was important. There was a concern about exploitation, and this research is one of those concerns. We talk about, in the area of criminology and criminal justice, jail populations represent a captive audience, quote unquote. And because of that, there's a concern about being manipulated or abused. This was carefully gone over, and I think there's still a concern a little bit about it, but the guys that participated were comfortable with the idea that this information would go public. And then there's APA. And I have to say, no, I won't say that because we're being recorded. More strengths and weaknesses, the curriculum, of course, being difficult to cover in a short period of time. And boundaries. As one of the hallmarks of the model is that we do not share last names, we do not share personal histories, and we do not share anything after we leave the institution and the course is finished. So that's very difficult because friendships formed, and they did with me as well. So it's a tough one, but everybody understood it, but still had some trouble with it. Equal treatment, the learning experience was good, and pedagogical format. So now the last one, not the last one, but the global traditions. What can you say? I thought the common law was the only one in the world. Well, some Canadians probably think that too. We tend to be a little bit ethnocentric unless we get out and travel or, happen to be arrested in Mexico. That wasn't me though. I paid the fine. But learning through each other was very important. And the humbling experience that people felt, I think everybody had, that, because we could learn so much from each other. And they take that part of the learning to the content. That's where that statement's coming from a larger text. The idea of being able to listen to different opinions allowed people to explain and expand what they were thinking. And there wasn't necessarily discussion without criticism, and we certainly had some interesting discussions around what the influence of Islamic law on current Western culture would do, and those were very heated. But I think we managed to get people back to center a little bit in terms of what that actually might mean in reality versus what we have in the media. And the one thing that inside students have access to is a lot of media. Unfortunately, it's CNN. Oh, did I say that out loud? You can take that off the script too, please. Or not. The idea that probably most outside students did more of their readings on time than they would if they were on campus because the inside people made them look bad. They would be quite prepared, and if they didn't read something and get it the first time, they would spend a couple of extra hours reading it again, talking with their fellow classmates inside. So that was, again, a good learning experience. And learning rather than getting a good grade. That would be an outside student. Would they recommend it? Generally, yes, for the right person. And the idea that when they're recognized not as numbers and they're recognized as students, which is why we emphasize that they're inside students and not inmates, and why the outside students are not university students, because those two opposites actually carry with them quite a lot of stigma. Not necessarily negative either. Being a university student is positive stigma in our society, but from someone who's incarcerated, they're just a bunch of smarty pants who know too much, think they're good. So that's part of the walls and the barriers we're talking about. Some of the critique is they need more awareness about what they're getting into. I'm not sure what we could do other than tell them it's gonna, I told them it was gonna hurt. It was gonna be hard, but I don't know what else they wanted for warning, but. And the last point about integrating more experiences into the program, that's something that we try to stay away from at the very personal level. So we did have a few options where people could get into discussions about that, about some things that generally happen, but the specifics we try to stay away from. So, but guys want to share their stories, so that's another thing. some people contradicted one of the critiques there about the realities of incarceration. That's the generalized things. Make sure that appropriate inmates are selected. And I think we did a pretty good job of this because people have to be dedicated. We had a couple of people who want to pursue higher education, and one of those people now is out and looking at universities. So the model delivered at William Head Institution, I think it lived up to the expectation of inspirational and transformational learning. I wouldn't know that it was life-changing. That's something different. But definitely reduced barriers. Did it improve understanding of content? Yes, we have no comparison group, so it's kind of hard to actually do a comparative analysis. But generally, there was significant uptake on the content. I could ask people a specific question about a legal system, and they would know what I was talking about. Did it reduce stigmatization? Absolutely. Self-efficacy for some, yes. For the outside students, maybe not so much. For the inside students, yes. Perception in the legal system, yes. For the positive, I should say. Not necessarily that's really bad and we should really have a revolution and smash the state and all that. Although that could happen. Future offerings in progress. We're debating right now. And I think we're going to offer it again in March. And we will continue the relationship with the CSC. And we will be working on, well, we've started working on a memorandum of understanding. With regards to teaching, I think there's some room for understanding a little bit more about how the model works. And there's quite a bit of research that touches on it, but in our context, I think it'd be a little bit, some more specifics would be helpful. On the other hand, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And assessing the effects of change in the delivery of curriculum and whether or not we can maybe learn from it a little bit in terms of student engagement. That's a big part of it. Questions? I'll come back to that. Acknowledgements, just to say thanks to the students, of course. Social science and School of Humanitarian Studies, our faculty and staff are very helpful with this, as was the university, in terms of getting students registered alone, never mind the rest of it. And that's us on our last day. And questions? Thank you.